Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you find yourself. My name is Jenny Draeger. I'm a training services consultant with Ex Libris. Welcome to, we're in session 4 of our series, Implementing Acquisitions in Alma. So our topic is Invoicing Resources. I did add a little extra topic in here, and I'll talk about it in just a moment. This slide is just talking about, you've seen this slide if you've been in any of these other sessions, just talking about who we designed this series for. So I'm not going to go through it again. So what we're going to be talking about today is invoicing, and then there's just a little bit on post-receiving processing. So I couldn't fit it in the time allotted last week with this series, so I put it in here. I knew we'd be tight. This is our agenda. We're going to start with the basics, start with basic workflow, and then moving into invoicing. I'm going to show you invoicing one-time orders a couple of different ways. We're going to be talking about invoicing continuous orders, whether they're subscription or standing orders. And then we're going to talk about invoicing from a file upload, so you have that option as well. Move on to payments and credits in Alma, talking about monitoring ledgers and funds in Alma, how you can keep track of what's happening throughout the year. Then that little bit about post-receiving processing and links to resources. Okay, remember, I have to do most of everything I'm doing is very manual. And next week, we're going to talk about integrations. So throughout this whole series, even though I'm doing everything manually, and that's to give you a good idea of how everything works in Alma, where to find things in Alma. But next week, we're going to talk about automating these processes, making them easier, keeping you from having to do those repeated administrative tasks. Let Alma do the uploads for you. Let Alma do the exports for you. And you just, do your checks and move your resources through the process. So our first topic is looking at the workflow and basics. And so you've seen this slide before. As we move through this entire process, we're at that last step, that invoicing step here. Sometimes I would get this question when I would talk to customers, do I really have to invoice? I've done my orders, I have that. The answer is yes, 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 yes. You do need to do that invoicing. Why? Because you want to close the loop on the transaction cycle. You want to track actual payment. Remember, a purchase order line is an estimation of what you're going to pay, where the invoice is the real payment. It might be the same, it might be different. You want to update those funds in your ledger where the invoice, spends the money. It's no longer just earmarked. So keeping those up to date. Remember, fiscal year rollovers also depend on that rollover. On invoices being closed, because one thing you roll over are, open one-time orders. And if things aren't received in invoices, guess what? They get rolled over. So another reason you do need to finish the process. And cost per use calculations rely on expenditures. So long story short, yes, we need you to invoice your resources. There's a couple questions I have for you about with your invoicing process today, however you're doing it. Do you have a review phase where someone else has to look for something? Do you have an approval process? And it might be based on conditions. It might be a price, it might be a vendor, it might be a type. We talked about this in the very first Alma session, talking about configuring or configurations, and we did talk about review rules and approval rules. When I get over to Alma, I'll pop in there and look at that again. Another thing to look at, and especially this is getting into next week's topic, looking at if any of your current vendors offer invoicing via EDI, because that is a beautiful thing, letting those invoices just come in and get created for you. You do your checks and move them on through the process. You don't even have to build those those invoices yourself. You let the systems do that. Your campus ERP, which is, your business office, the money, all that. Can you export invoices from Alma to an ERP? That's you telling the business office, yes, cut the check, it's gone through whatever here now. Now, I've worked with some libraries that have to send the invoice over. I work with other libraries that have to get into the ERP's interface. And, so it's essentially double work. You're going to do the work in Alma, you're going to do the work in the ERP. Alma can talk to those systems. And I'm not saying take it on today, right, as you implement Alma. Maybe you're going to get Alma up and running, and then you're going to initiate that conversation with your business office. Many of our customers do this. It's highly secure. It's not something that would be on the cutting edge. And I know some business offices are open to this and some aren't. So, maybe you're going to wait a little while to try that out. The last question is, do you get payment confirmation back from your business office that says, yes, we cut the check, here's the voucher number? So you can work that into your Alma workflow as well. Talking about invoice workflow, there are some steps to it. And instead of redesigning an image, I just took this right out of our documentation, and here's a link to the documentation. So the invoices get created a number of ways. You build you have your invoice, you have your invoice lines, and then Alma goes through a validation and alert processing. So part of the validation is, do the like the total invoice and the invoice lines calculated match? Do the funds have money in them? Those kinds of hard stops that almost just going to stop. End of story. These things have to be clear before you move along. And then any review rules or approval rules. So how you kind of move through these down as you scroll down through this workflow. Is approval automatic or manual? So if it's automatic, it goes to the payment. This is where Alma can export that, hey, cut the check message over to your ERP, or Alma might not be doing that. And then finally, the invoices closes. Okay, so let's move on through this. Now, talking about operator roles related to invoicing, that additional document I created, instead of adding this to slides, I said, heck, let's just use this document I created. So this is that document available on the dashboard website for the series. Remember, this is a selection of user roles related to acquisitions. It's not all of them. As I scroll down, we're down to invoicing. So I'm moving down just a little bit here. So there's a receiving operator and receiving operator limited. I'm sorry, we're down to invoicing. Sorry, we're at this next one. So there's an invoice manager, manages invoice creation, review, and approval in activities and assigning invoices to other operators. The invoice operator creates, edits, reviews operators, reassigns invoices to other operators, and then invoice operator extended. Remember, any role in Alma that has extended in it, the activity under any extended role is just deletion. So if you are allowed to add, edit, and delete, you need both the operator and operator extended roles. That's throughout all of Alma, okay? So those are the roles. You might need all three, okay? So because if you do review and create and delete, you need all three roles. It's not just one takes care of everything, okay? So another thing on this documentation, I mentioned like an ERP system, and I have a little glossary down here. So enterprise resource planning could be Banner, could be one of the Oracle products, Illusion, all those kinds of things. So your finance system, that's what we're talking about when we talk about an ERP. let's get back here to Alma. This link takes you to the full documentation for all the user roles. So a very helpful table to have too. So we need to create invoices. You have a number of ways to do it. Again, I'm going to be doing it manually today. I could create an invoice and add the invoice details manually. So I'm going to build my invoice from scratch. I could create an invoice from a purchase order using details from the purchase order. I can create an invoice from a file. So I can either do that through an Excel file or an EDI file. Or you can use the EDI file and have that automatically set up, run, ingested, etc. So you don't ever have to create it. You let the system speak, you let Alma create it, and you have to do your checks. You do want to review, make sure the values are right, do a quick set of checks and move the invoice through to the next phase. So next step is talking about, and we're going to get into EDI a little bit more down here. So don't think that's all on the topic. Let's start with invoicing one-time orders. Now notice I am not splitting this into electronic and physical. A one-time order is a one-time order. It might be electronic, it might be physical. The workflow is the same. Alma doesn't care what type of inventory it has. Okay. So when we go to create an invoice in Alma, you go to acquisitions, receiving an invoice and create invoice. And then you have these options here, manually, from PO, from a file. I wanted to draw this out. You might be a smaller institution and you are going to, number one, create invoices manually using one of these methods. You might be the person that does receiving and invoicing at your institution, at your library. In that case, instead of and, okay, and then there's like a third piece of this, and you also got the bill along with the materials. If you have that situation, you could come in here, create the invoice, and then receive the materials off the invoice. I'm not going to demo that today, so I would recommend trying that out in your sandbox if you find yourself in that situation. You're the same person that does both the work, both invoicing and receiving. You are creating invoices manually using one of these methods, and you get the bill at the same time as the materials. It's like the perfect storm to use this functionality, whether or not it's going to work in your institution. There's not a wrong way to handle this, set up this workflow, just what would work with your staffing and workflow. So when I first go to create that invoice and I have those options, manual, if I choose manual, I'm going to create the invoice and then fill out the details of the invoice and the invoice lines manually. From a PO, remember how when purchase order lines could be on their own purchase order or they could be grouped into, you could let Alma group them. This is, again, I can create an invoice from a purchase order and it will pull all the details from the purchase order over here to the invoice and all the lines. So does your shipment match your PO? I don't know how often that happens with the way, today's, logistics. If you have 10 items on a purchase order, do 8 of them show up at once, or are they all coming from different warehouses and there's only 2 here and 3 the next day and 1 the next day? However that works, but this is an option, or then from that file, whether you're using that Excel file or EDI. Those are your options. Remember this handle receiving, you would only do that for physical materials. So that's one more thing this works with. It does not handle with activating electronic resources. That's that different workflow that we saw last week. A couple other things on that summary tab on the invoice is this pro rata checkbox. So if you select use pro rata, then these additional windows pop up. And that would be if your overhead costs, shipping, insurance, etc., are considered part of the cost of the book and they are distributed across the invoice lines. If they are separate charges, they're not part of the invoice lines, they're not broken down across, if you have 4 lines on this invoice, these would be split accordingly. If they are separate lines on your invoice, you don't check this box. So if you don't check that box, each additional charge is displayed as an individual invoice line. That if your library pays taxes, so some states in the United States do, some don't. I'm not sure about throughout Europe how that works. If your library pays taxes on materials, you can set the VAT here on the summary tab. And then we've got whether they're inclusive or exclusive. Click this link to go in there because that talks about how Alma calculates it. And not everyone uses that, but it's a very good, clear piece of doc about that. And then at the bottom, the payment information. So all of this is on the summary tab. So if this invoice is prepaid, Alma can take care of that for you. And if you mark that prepaid, Alma will not even try to send the invoice to the ERP. The invoice is immediately closed. You're done. So we're going to see that as we get into. So I'm going to go in and create an invoice. When you first, out of the box, if you have not done any changes to Alma's configuration, out of the box, Alma is going to create these 4 additional lines. You can configure these to not be created. You can configure them to, only create some of them. You can create none and add them manually, however you want to do it. This link takes you to those configuration options. I'm going to do a manual invoice creation. So once I create my invoice, I just click add invoice line, and then I can either enter a PO line number or I can search for my line to build it, check my price, check my funding, review the details, change the details. Maybe you're going to change the fund. Maybe you're going to split it. Maybe it's a different price. Sorry, I'm going to open that chat and hide it because I don't want it up on this screen. There we go. I'm just trying to keep it out of my vision here. Sorry about that. So as you review the details, then if you're adding another line, just click add, repeat. Once you're done, you hit add and close, then adding invoice lines is done. If you create your invoice from a purchase order or the import of a file, all the invoice lines get populated, but you do want to check them. Maybe a price is different. Maybe you want to update a reporting code. From there, you click on the row action menu and choose edit, and then you can go along, update whatever in the invoice lines. Once you're done, save and continue. We'll move the invoice into that validation, review, approval phase. Okay, so let's go create some invoices. Close this down. Okay, I've increased the size of Alma. I want to make sure, yep. And I increased the size of my cursor, so we should be good there. So let's go to acquisitions, receiving an invoice, and create invoice. And I'm going to do this first one manually. So I'm going to choose manual, next. My invoice number, so I would be replicating whatever invoice is in front of me. Oh my gosh, it's already 0811 JMD. The invoice date, let's say it was yesterday. Who's my vendor? BookSense. Now, invoices are at the vendor level. You can add the vendor account, completely optional. Remember, PO lines were at the vendor account, but invoices you don't have to drill down that far. And then let's say the amount, I'm just going to say $100. Payment method, accounting department, they're the ones that really, really, really cut the check. I don't. This is that if I were to use pro rata, I would check that box or not. I think this vendor is assigned to do that, so that's why that is populating. I'm not going to fill anything in there. And this is that prepaid option. Now, look, I cannot click prepaid if accounting department is my option up here, but I could change this to anything else. And this list is also configurable. So if I do credit card, then I have prepaid as an option. But so by design, now it doesn't have to be. So by design, accounting department won't give you that. Okay. So save and create invoice lines. Now I need to add my lines. And they are on separate purchase orders. So here's the out of the box, those additional fields that got created. And it's okay if they sit here and they're zero. It doesn't hurt anything. Some people don't mind and they leave them. Some say, oh, I don't want those on. I'm going to turn them off. That's fine. Just configure Alma accordingly. Add invoice line. If I have the PO line number, I can just go ahead and type it in. Textile Designs. This is the one I want. So I thought I was going to pay $37. I'm not going to change that. My reporting codes, look, those came over from my PO. So I don't have to fill those in again. Here's the funding. Here's the value. Good. Everything's the same. No need to make any changes. Let's say you don't have that PO line number. So then I can just go ahead and search. Alma knows the vendor, so it's limiting it down. I'm starting to type the title. Now I could click on the little hamburger search menu too, but I don't even have to go anywhere. So again, it populates everything. Oh, let's say, oh, this ended up being $21. It's split. I split this across two different funds, 50-50. I could change this right now. Done and closed. So here are my two lines. Now I know I'm going to get an error because if I try, it's not going to validate right now because when I calculated this, it's 58 versus 100. But I want to show you that error. It's a hard stop. Almost going to say, nope. Not going to do that. So if I make this match, which if I would have taken, the paper invoice, whatever's in front of you, paper, electronic, should match those invoice lines, and you would have had that correct at the beginning of this process. Save, continue. So then Alma's saying, are there any review rules? No. Are there any approval rules? No. And I'm done. So that was manually creating an invoice. Let's do this again from a PO. Now, when I talk to people, because some people say, oh, I definitely want to do this from a PO. I definitely want to do it from a PO. And sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes it's not because you do still have to make edits. So just be aware. 10313. I have my PO number. Click save. Now Alma's going to populate this for me. It's going to just put the PO number. So it brings me to the Invoice Lines tab. Those were the three lines. Are the prices the same? Are the funds the same? If I do need to change anything, I can just click here and, click edit and go in, update reporting codes, update funds, update prices. And back on the summary tab, do you need to change this? You need to change the date. Oh, that's today's date. You know, maybe it was Monday. Now it pulled in that value from the lines. And then save and continue. So that was creating, we created an invoice manually and one from a PO line. We're going to come back and do the files. Okay. Now, once we get everything created, I talked about that validation process and how, you know, there are certain things like money not being in the fund, the funds, the total fund and the invoice line calculation not matching. Alma's going to do the hard stop on those. The review rules, those are completely optional. Alma checks the invoice against any review rules that you put in place. If something gets put under review, it does require staff intervention with the appropriate roles to go in and review that order line. I'm sorry, that invoice. Same thing with approval. Alma checks the approval rules. So these are two separate sets of rules. And it also requires staff to intervene. Now, where those are set in Alma, I'm just going to refresh your memory under acquisitions, invoices, here's the review rules, here's the approval rules. So we talked about this in the first session. And remember, if you come in here and go, what are these? Remember my favorite shortcut, whenever you're at wherever you are in Alma, come up here to the help screen. Help for this page brings you right there. So we do have some approval rules in place. But these invoices passed the test and none of them hooked on these review rules. And again, don't overcomplicate the situation. It's just if you have things in place, don't. Because these are kind of speed bumps on the approval process, on the processing of invoices. So don't, you know, only put them in if you need them there. So now let's look at invoicing continuous orders. Again, print or electronic doesn't matter. It's about continuous orders. Okay. Subscriptions. Let's first talk about subscriptions versus standing. They're both considered continuous orders. So workflow for creating an invoice for a continuous subscription is the same. We still have those three options. Same information on the summary tab about additional charges, about taxes, about prepayment. All that is the same. The difference is, and I mentioned this when we were creating purchase order lines for cereals. The difference is if you are talking about a continuous subscription invoice line, one of these two fields need to be filled in. The subscription dates range is a date picker. This additional information is free text. So you could just write in like FY 2021, end of story. It doesn't need to be specific. You could put gobbly, you know, you could put anything in this field as long as there's text in this field almost happen. If you happen to fill in the subscription date range on the PO line, it displays here, so it's easier to replicate. This was not a required field on the purchase order line. So if you're going to use the date picker, you might want to make that part of your workflow so it's easy to replicate. You don't have to go look anywhere for it. Or if you're just going to put a fiscal period name or something over here, you're fine as well. So that was my caveat as we were creating purchase order lines. I wanted to show you it when we got here. This slide is just talking about filling that in, how it populates on this screen. If you are creating invoices from a file import, whether it's Excel or EDI, just ensure that that required data is in the file so that Alma will throw it into review if that's not there, because that's one of the validation checks. So that can be filled in from a file for you. Another box that appears when we create a continuous subscription PO line or invoice line is this check subscription date overlap. Don't check it. It's a tool. I wanted to explain what it is. It's a tool used with editing prior purchase orders. And then this goes into more of the detail about what that functionality does. Since we're starting about just getting, Alma or acquisitions up and running, I don't want to dig too deep into that right now. Okay, let's go create our purchase order line or invoice line for this. So I'm going back to acquisitions. I'm creating an invoice. This is going to be, here's my continuous order. Let's do this one also manually. So my invoice number. And something there, like this Monday. So my vendor for this one is also BookSense. There we go. Forget how much I paid for this, so I'm just going to put a value in there. Happy with that. Maybe this one is prepaid. I don't know. So I can say credit card, prepaid, skip. So skip this whole process. Save and create invoice. Add an invoice line. And we'll do 8319. I'll make this match the front. I won't get that error. Oh, so I didn't fill in the PO line subscription and I skipped those fields. So that's another validation. Almost, it's a hard stop. Just going to put a value in that additional information and close. Oh, why is that checked? There we go. Same workflow. Created the invoice, add the line, fill in that extra piece of data. And we're done. So that was invoicing a continuous subscription. Now here's a note about continuous standing orders. So if you have a standing order, these fields still appear on the invoice line, but they are not required. A standing order is a continuous line in that every year with the fiscal rollover, the PO line will roll over. But these dates are not required. So it's almost like you're creating that one-time order. So let me come in here, back to Alma, acquisitions, create invoice. We'll do this one from a PO. This is my standing order I'll do. So maybe I know that PO number. 102316. Oh, I didn't click on it. 102316. There we go. Happy $15, no changes, just that quick and let it go. So that was creating an invoice of a standing order. Okay, now let's talk about invoicing from a file upload. Two different file formats are available. Same workflow, create the invoice. Now we would just choose the from file option. Identify the vendor, choose the appropriate file type, whether it's EDI or Excel, locate the file, upload and run the job. So this is like running a job, like running any other job in Alma. Now you might say, what the heck? Tell me more about this Excel file. Well, there's two places to find it. You can click here and download an Excel example. That's one option. Or go to this link in the documentation and you will see another file here And it has more description than just the sample file. This is a helpful document here. I wanted to point out when I was researching this, these file examples, if you love these new reporting codes, remember Alma recently expanded from 3 to 5 reporting codes. Right now, this file only has slots for 3, and our development team is updating it right now to get up to 5. Okay. So just be aware of that caveat. And then once it's updated, so they're working on it right now, it'll be updated in the CKC, the Customer Knowledge Center, and then also from that download spot. So there's the Excel file, which is a specific format, or there's EDI, Electronic Data Interchange. I want to mention EDI is a business, it's a standard. It's a sharing information between 2 entities, 2 business. It's a standardized format. It's not an ex libris standard. It's not a library standard. We are following the rules. We are using the EDI rules according to the standard that has been written. It's not our rule. And it can be used more for invoicing. Again, we're going to talk about that more next week. Other ways you can use EDI. A little bit more about EDI. There are a couple of quote unquote flavors of EDI. There's X12 and Edifact, and Alma uses the Edifact standard. So the vendor record has a tab where you enter your EDI information. We'll look at that next week. Automated communication between your vendor and Alma. There's an FTP server involved. You might have your own FTP server. You might be using ours now that we make available to you. So it would that's the place for the files to get dropped, no matter which direction they're coming from, and picked up. Instead of creating a list of vendors, what I did was I just put a link to the documentation, because this list can change. There it comes. What this is doing, it's bringing me to the developer network. And this is talking about EDI integration. These are communications with vendors that have been verified. And note this note too. So here's a whole list. And then EDI communication should work with any vendors that use EDI, but they have not been tested. So if these are your vendors, it's a great place to start with this communication. Then over here, there's more information about other ways EDI can be used. So that's from the developer network. Let's get back here. There we go. So let's go ahead and upload a file. And I want to show you this file really quick. Pull it up here. Okay. Here's a sample. Here's the example of the file I'm going to pull in here. That it's so Alma. Oops, darn it. Sorry about that. Here's an invoice number. Here are the invoice lines, invoice line numbers, ISBNs, title. So this is a sample of that file. Okay. So I'm sorry, I kind of moved around on my PowerPoint here. So let's go into Alma. I'm going to create my invoice, same workflow from a file. Next, Excel. I need my vendor. Oh, this was ProQuest, this vendor, I think. Upload the file. I just need to navigate to the file, and I put it in my downloads. There's my file. Run. The job runs. And like any other job in Alma, where do you go? Admin, manage jobs and sets, monitor jobs. This was a small invoice. It had 2 lines. It's already done running. Invoice create from spreadsheet. Just like any other job in Alma, there's a report. Now I had some errors. Oh, it was a Gobi invoice. There we go. I chose the wrong vendor. So Alma stopped me right now. So it didn't load and I would need to redo it. I think when I did it the other day, it worked okay. Invoice. Here's this one. There were some fun code errors, but it's just that simple. I have a few sample invoices to play with there. So it's just reading that file and creating the invoice for you. And again, go in, double check the lines, double check the values, and you're done. Oh, okay. So invoicing via file upload. Okay, we talked about this. We talked about that. EDI. There we go. Payments and credits. So once the invoice has been created, you know, it's past review, it's past approval, it's out the door, essentially. You're done with it in your office. It can have a status of ready to be paid, waiting for payment, or closed. So ready to be paid, if you have that ERP integration, that would be Alma communicating to the ERP, Alma sending the message to them, hey, go cut the check. We have approved it in the library. If you get that notification back from your business office that says, hey, the invoice, you know, it's been sent to there and you get some voucher number back, that would be the ERP communicating data back to Alma. And then there's closed. Alma's paid and closed, or the invoice is paid and closed. There's no more activity on it. So some invoices might go straight to closed, especially if you did prepaid. You might have an integration with your excuse me, business office, but you only send it, you don't get anything back, so you can skip this step. Or you don't send things out, but you do get the notification back about the voucher number. They could be sitting and waiting for payment, and you enter that voucher in. You have some different options in how your workflow goes. Now, these are two configurations that relate to this workflow under configuration, acquisition, general, and other settings. There's one setting called Invoice Skip ERP. If you set that to true, Alma is not sending invoices to the ERP. If it's false, Alma is sending. Alma's going to create that file and push it out to your business office. It's going to dump the file on an FTP server. That system's going to come grab it. And then, do you receive notification from your ERP whether the invoice was paid? If it's yes, you get notification back. Now that notification could be entered in automatically if you have the integration set up between the two systems, or manually if you don't. So some people like to enter that in Alma, so that way in the future, if there's ever a question about a payment, they've got it all in Alma. They don't have to go to the business office. They don't have to log into another system. If this handle invoice payment setting is set to false, the invoice is closed immediately. If you do have that handle invoice payment set to true, the status goes under acquisitions, receiving an invoicing, waiting for payment. This is where the invoice sits, and it's waiting for data in this field. This is taking you back to the developer network, to the link to finance integrations between Alma and the ERP system. If you get a credit from your vendor, create an invoice manually. So choose the manual option, create an invoice line. Well, on the summary tab, put the vendor who gave you the credit, enter the total amount as a negative back on the summary tab. And then add an invoice line, enter the value of the credit with that minus sign in front of it. Select the fund where the money should go back. And then approve the invoice. That's all you do there. Monitoring ledgers and funds. Remember, when you create a purchase order line in Alma, Alma encumbers the money. It earmarks it, it doesn't really spend it. When the invoice gets created, at that point, a disencumbrance, so here's the encumbrance down here. Then so with the invoice, it disencumbers the same amount of money from the same fund as the money was encumbered. And then the expenditure, so this is coming from that invoice line. It may be a different value. It may be a different fund. Maybe you thought you were going to pay it out of one fund, and on the invoice, you updated it to a different fund. So that expenditure might show up in a different fund. So we'll take a look. Acquisitions, funds and ledgers. I'll go to fiscal 2021. Now I've been doing a lot of work on this sciences one, so let me just click edit in here. And I'm going to go look at the transactions. So you could see all that activity. Now I was testing out those credit memos, and this is really a credit. And I can go look at it right here. See how I can do the hot link to it. Here's the line. I was testing this out and grabbing that screenshot. Remember, everything in here is up to the minute and up and down to the penny in Alma. Remember, analytics is yesterday's data. So if I had some activities today, it doesn't go into analytics until tonight. So any reports, if I wanted to run a report on today's data, I'd want to run them early in the morning tomorrow. Don't run them late at night. So that is how you can keep an eye on your funds, track your spending. You're in the ledger in an allocated fund on that transactions tab. Now let's talk a little bit about post-receiving processing before we're done. Remember when we received those items last week and we said keep in department? We said we have more work to do on these items. So where did they go? They're not on the shelf. You go into acquisitions, post-receiving processing, receiving department items. And the items that you see there were marked as keep in department when they were received. Now at first, out of the box, I think this shows all, but you can limit down the results into a single location or step in technical services. We talked about how you can configure this list to represent the different places materials could be back in tech services. And the benefit of this list is completely for staff so that you can put your hands on materials. You know where things are back there. It's not for the public, it's for you. So let's go take a look at this in Alma. Acquisitions, now I need to be in that receiving department. So I'm in tech services here. Here's my receiving department items. And here they all are. Some are in physical processing, some are in copy cataloging. So the first step is copy cataloging. Now, As you process these materials, like, so digital textile design, one way I can do this, let's say I did my cataloging, you know, I've done my checks. So I can, there's two ways to do this. I can click on, let's say I got done with whatever I need to do. I'm not going to get into the metadata editor right now. If I click on edit here, I am opening up the app work order and I can change it here. This needs to go on to physical processing and it moves. Another way to do this is you can just check this box or multiple boxes, check, 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 and do a change status up here to physical processing. And that moves them, and then you know, put them on the cart and push them over to the next team that's going to take over. So now I'm part of the processing step, I'm adding stamps, I'm adding barcodes, and finishing them up. I also want to point out there is this column here for interested users. So this could be your signal to fast track those materials through the processing department because someone's waiting for them. There's going to be a hold placed on this. Now, the next, okay, so this slide is talking about moving items from one processing status to the next, the two different ways to do it. But the key is I want to get you to here. When these items are ready to go to the shelf, you are done with them in the back. We want you to go to acquisitions, post-receiving processing, scan in items. You mark done. It doesn't matter what's up here. It doesn't matter what's here in this field. You want them to mark, you want to mark them done, and then scan the item barcodes. Now, I want to draw your attention because if you look at this screen, it is possible to choose done right here, but don't do it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I learned that a long time ago. It's more elegant, it's more graceful, almost going to catch everything if you use this scan and item workflow as opposed to the done. It'll save you time. So let me come in here, back to Alma. I'm in processing. I got done with all my items. They're ready to go to the shelf. So I just go under acquisitions, post receiving processing, scan in items. Mark these as done. This closes the app work order. There we go. Oh, I wrote that barcode down, but I must not have entered it in the item. This one, I accidentally put another work order on this. That's why that one didn't go. So that was me. Now, what I want to point out, these two are in transit. They're going to the circ desk. Remember when I talked last week about how you can make a circ desk a receiving location? Well, in my library, in my sample library here, my acquisitions department is separate from my circ desk. Out of the box, that's your configuration. And if you have a centralized act department that works for more than one library in Alma, or you're a whole separate team that isn't also doing fulfillment work, that initial scan places the item in transit to the circ desk. When it gets to the circ desk, it'll be scanned again by staff. And at that point, the item goes to in place, or the item is trapped for a request. So if there was a hold on that, at that point, the item gets held, put on the shelf, send a notification to the user with that second scan. If you are a smaller library and your staff does both acquisitions and fulfillment work, what this will do is it will keep your staff from having to toggle between locations to do their work. So that is if you make your CERT desk also a receiving location. The single scan places the item on shelf, traps the hold, sends out the notification. So you got to look at how your institution is set up. Who does the work? Where do the materials go? Oh, if let's say you do have one place this might be going in transit, it might not be going home. If the pickup location is another library, almost going to tell you to send it there. Maybe it does live at Maine, but someone wanted to pick it up at, I don't know, the Art and Architecture Library. So almost going to tell you to send it there with that scan. That's why these are the reasons you don't want to use that done. You want Alma to do the scan in and Alma to tell you where it needs to go, or else you're just going to make more work for yourself. If I mark it down, I put it on the shelf, then I'm going to have to go pull it again because Alma's going to say, hey, now I need this. Just more graceful. The last few slides here are the same things you've seen. A link to the Knowledge Center, often also called the CKC for Customer Knowledge Center. Just want to get you familiar with that term. You might see that in presentations or people say that. Once you get into there, just go under Alma, Product Documentation, Alma Online Help Act. Remember my favorite track help for this page, right, from anywhere in Alma. We do have an acquisitions LibGuide. All of our doc is also indexed in Google. Alma user roles brings up that big table of all the user roles. Next week, we're talking about automating the acquisitions process. We're going to talk about different integrations that maybe you want to approach, you know, a vendor you've worked with a long time. Maybe you want to roll into that slowly. Maybe you're ready to get those integrations going. You have a lot of options, and how you enable them is completely up to you. There's not a wrong answer with that. Here's that link to the series Ray has put into the chat more than once. There will be a survey at the end of this. When you log out of WebEx2, Ray reads every, you know, all the feedback. We read them, we implement them, working on changes for next go around already. So we really appreciate anything you have to offer. We do also have a team, Amanda, that's been helping me out in this series, answering questions with premium services. That's a team. They are for a fee service, but they are more one-on-one, more customized, more individualized. Or if you find you need that, you may not, but you may find those helpful. Ooh, there were plenty of comments. I didn't watch them all. We will be turning the Q&A into a documentation or into a doc. I'll work on that later and we'll get that posted along with the recording. And Ray had mentioned the recording will be posted by end of business tomorrow. We usually get it. We'll get it done at some point tomorrow. So thanks everyone for your time. It's the top of the hour, so we've just hit the number. Appreciate your time and attention throughout this entire series, and we'll see you next week for session 5. Thanks, Ray, and thank you, Amanda. I appreciate all your help today.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks everybody for the very active comment section today. We appreciate you, and we hope we see you next week.
Thanks, and bye, everyone.
Bye.